Y'all, I cannot find my other camera battery, so when this one goes, I'm probably gonna switch over to filming with my phone, which I don't like to do because it eats up my memory, and transferring videos from my phone to my computer takes a long time, which is why I bought a camera that came with 2 batteries, and the other one I'm just like, no clue where it is. I mean, I was like laying on the floor looking around, can't find it. We're gonna talk today about B words I see and have heard for probably all my fucking life about work-life balance. And it's something that I guess I used to strive for, but no longer, especially since I've been in therapy and especially since I started my own business. I don't give a fuck about work-life balance anymore because that's not the B word that I'm concerned with. But let's talk about it. As someone who's self-employed, who doesn't have employees, you would think that I would just be working all the time, or that, you know, the entrepreneurial kind of thing where when you work for yourself, you don't take time off and you're always thinking about your business. And that may be true some of the time, but it's not what I strive for. I have to be very careful and curate my time in a way that's supportive to me, and I have to be very intentional about like what I set my work hours to, when I take time off. And last year, 2024, I think I did a great job of taking time off, even though it was a little uncomfortable. I did it, and I'm proud of myself for that. If you haven't watched my 2024 victories video yet, go back and watch that, because I did take some time to talk about the discomfort of doing that, taking time off and being self-employed and like not having the best options when you're trying to make a decision, but choosing the best with what you have, or from what you have. So I talked a little bit about time off in that video, but I wanted to dig more into this work-life balance thing and why I think it's useless to focus on balance, on creating balance in your life and with your work, and focus instead on a different B word, which is to set boundaries. So I have been in therapy the past 6 months or so. I've been in therapy again, like going every week, and we've talked a lot about boundaries because I'm not somebody who was like really taught how to set boundaries and grew up to be an adult with practically no boundaries to speak of, and that caused me to be pretty anxious, stressed out, overwhelmed person. And that didn't change whenever I quit my stressful job and started working for myself. Duh. Like, spoiler alert, if you are considering quitting your job, starting a business, it doesn't get less stressful just because you don't have a fucking boss anymore. You do have a boss, it's you. And if you don't know how to set and keep appropriate boundaries, you're going to struggle with accountability for running a business, speaking from experience. So let's talk about this work-life balance thing and whether or not I even think it exists. Balance, if we think about like the word balance, we're talking about scales, or we're talking about a tightrope walker, or some way to keep equal pressure or time or energy on 2 different sides of something, and maintaining that balance so that you don't tip, you know, one way or the other to extremes. So people think about like, oh, I want to create work-life balance because I'm overwhelmed at work, or I don't have enough time for my family, or I don't have any fucking hobbies because I'm working all the time, or thinking about work even when I'm not at work. I understand where you're coming from when you say you want to create work-life balance, but I don't think that even is something that exists or can be achieved. And if you do achieve it for like a day or a week where you're like, I feel like my life is really imbalanced, there's always fucking something the next day or the next week, right? Like, that is what life is. We're just going along with it and kind of experiencing all this stuff. This kind of meme that floats around where it's like, if I can just get through this next week, everything will be fine after that. And that's like the joke, right? Because it's always, oh, if I can just get to the end of this week, I'll feel so much better. And then Monday comes around and you're back in the same exact emotional boat that you were in before. But I think people put a lot of emphasis on creating work-life balance because they feel so shitty and because they want to have things in their life that they look forward to and that they actually enjoy and can like live in the present moment with. But we spend so much time like looking ahead rather than living in the present moment that we automatically create that imbalance. We say, oh, my next vacation isn't for 3 months and I don't have any time planned to take off during that time. So like the next 3 months are gonna suck, and then you like kind of create that self-fulfilling prophecy of like life and work sucking for 3 months. When you are not living in the present moment, when you are thinking about the future or thinking about the past and like focusing really hard on that, I think that's where you create the imbalance. And I think it's because of a lack of boundaries. And the more I am in therapy, the more I realize that like all of this stuff really needs to be taught to us when we are like much younger. And I think like, you know, in a healthy, functional parent-child or caretaker-child relationship, that those things are taught. But that's not necessarily what I experienced, and that's okay. I'm like learning about it now, and I'm not like regretful of anything, but I'm like, okay, like I deserve to learn about these things and like how to set appropriate boundaries and uphold them to protect myself when I was much younger. So I'm gonna do it now because I deserve it now too, as an adult. And I want us to consider like what would even feel like if we were in that perfect state of balance and we stayed that way forever. Like what would that feel like to you? Would you just never be stressed or anxious about anything again? Would nobody ever bother you or irritate you again? Like think about how unrealistic that is. When we have balance in our work, in our lives, and in our relationships, like that's a level of perfection that is kind of pointless and non-existent in the first place, but it's pointless to strive for that. Because even in relationships, you know, if you are a partner, you have a spouse, or if you've ever been in a romantic partnership with another person, you know that it is not always 50-50. Right now, my partner is having to work a lot, like a lot of overtime, a lot of on-call kind of stuff, and that means that like this week, most of the household duties that we normally share are kind of on me because he's working. And that's okay. Like I'm not resentful about that, because when I'm going through it and I'm having a particularly tough week, I say, hey, like I am glued to the couch right now. I'm feeling a lot of fatigue. I'm feeling a lot of stress and anxiety, and I don't have it in me to do the normal things. And so, you know, we trade back and forth. It's never exactly 50-50. And even if it were, it wouldn't stay that way. So I don't think that the balance thing is something that exists and is something that we should strive for in anything. Because how would you measure the concept of balance? Would you get to the end of the week and be like, okay, let me check my checklist every day. I felt very great and balanced. Like, how would you measure that unless you were really, truly living in the present moment and checking in with your body and with yourself and with your emotions? Most people don't do that. Most people are not fucking willing to do that. So what is the point of striving for balance if you don't have a way to measure that? You're not willing to kind of like deal with your emotions as they come up anyway. You know, would it be like, oh, I took all of my PTO that I accrued last year. When I worked my job, I never used all my PTO. I left that job with over 100 hours balance of PTO because I didn't fucking take it. And that was my choice not to take it, right? Like, I just thought that it was going to be a better experience to not take time off, knowing I would get called or texted while I was off, you know, on vacation, or like something would happen and there would be an emergency, or I would not have an emergency to address when I'm on vacation, but I would still be dreading it and thinking about going back to work the entire time I was on vacation. And so, like, PTO, not fucking worth it to me. I would rather go be miserable at work than take time off and be miserable anyways. Like, that's just the choice that I made. And that might sound crazy, but like, that is truly the experience that I was living in. I don't think it's helpful to try and measure whether your life is balanced. I don't think it is something that any of us should be striving for. And you can disagree with me on that, and that's okay. But I want to talk about another option, which is learning to set and keep boundaries. And boundaries are something that everybody deserves to have because boundaries help us feel safe and protected, right? If someone is overstepping a boundary, or if we're considering letting go of a boundary, that can probably come up and be like a stressful nervous system dysregulation situation. So let's talk about what a boundary is. First of all, it is something that needs to be clearly stated. Just like with consent, consent needs to be like stated verbally or in some other level of communication, clearly stated. Like, this is what the boundary is. This is what I'm willing to do. This is what I'm not willing to do. That is something that needs to be clearly communicated, and it needs to be done so in a way that the other person can understand, and for you to feel like you can assert yourself no matter what happens, no matter what the reaction is, that you get to feel like, I know what my boundaries are, and I get to say that to somebody else and tell them, you know, how far I'm willing to go or what I'm willing to do or not do. Boundaries are not up for debate. Nobody gets to debate with you about what your boundary is. If you've set a boundary and you've been intentional and you've asserted that to somebody else, they don't get to fucking argue with you about it, right? Like, I mean, they could sit there and argue, but that's when you get to be a brick fucking wall and just let them argue. But it's not a thing that's up for debate. It's not something that somebody else decides for you. It is something you decide for yourself and you clearly state it, and nobody gets to try to convince you, or should try to convince you, although they probably will, to let go of that boundary. So it's not up for debate. It's something that you clearly state. Probably the most important thing, it's your responsibility to uphold. We cannot blame other people for coming up to our boundary or for overstepping our boundaries. It is something that you are charged with, that you charge yourself with, to maintain, to uphold. To keep your boundaries is your responsibility. It is nobody else's responsibility to say, you have that boundary, and so I'm not going to do that to you, or I'm not going to say something like that to you, or I'm not going to speak to you in that tone of voice or ask you that, because that's what your boundary is. It's not up to other people to do that for you. You're the one that is supposed to say, no, I'm not willing to do that, or no, I won't be speaking to you when you use that tone of voice to me. That is your responsibility to uphold. You cannot delegate that responsibility to somebody else. It's your boundaries are what you set for yourself, and therefore it's something that you maintain for yourself. Boundaries also don't exist to hurt or harm anybody else. If you think about it like a fucking wall or a door that can be opened, if somebody else were going to come up and run into the door or into the wall over and over and over again, they would be hurting themselves. But the wall being there or the door being there and just existing doesn't exist to harm or hurt that person. If they choose to run into something over and over again, that's on them, right? Your boundary doesn't exist to hurt or harm other people. It exists to protect you and make you feel safe. And this is something that I've had to learn over and over again, and I'm sure that I will continue to learn, that I want to be detached from, or emotionally unattached to, whether people poke at my boundaries, prick my boundaries, prod at my boundaries, ask about my boundaries. Like, that's not within my control, unfortunately. And it may be annoying or irritating to have somebody come up to your boundary and test it over and over again. But you have to, well, my goal really is to get to the place where people that want to continue doing that aren't going to emotionally affect me, aren't going to get me agitated or irritated, because I'm in control of myself and my feelings and my emotions. A boundary is something that you get to detach from, whether people poke at it. And it's also to create the life that you want to have. If you want to have a life that is balanced or mostly calm and peaceful and routine, and however you want to live your life, however you want to feel in your life, boundaries are there to help you create that life that you want to have. Let's go through some examples of what it looks like to set a boundary in your business. So we talked about taking time off. Time is something that you probably need to set some boundaries around, because if you don't set boundaries around your time, not only will other people have you spinning in circles, but you yourself will drive yourself crazy trying to run a business without having good boundaries about how you spend your time. This goes for active working time. So if you are someone that is always client facing when you're working, setting time for when you're going to do that. If you are someone like me who does mostly solo kind of administrative work as a bookkeeper, I'm most of the time working by myself, setting the time for when I'm going to do that, and also setting time off. When do you not want to be working? And I think it's actually more important to start there whenever you are creating a calendar system or setting up boundaries for your time. Start with when you don't want to be fucking working. And that may be easier said than done. That may be really almost impossible for some people to do, especially because we live in a system of capitalism where you got to be working if you want to make money to have, a roof over your head and food in your fridge. So it may seem counterintuitive to think first about when you don't want to be working, but I see that as prioritizing me as a person before me as the business owner or me as a bookkeeper. I see that as me prioritizing my human body, my skin suit that I'm living in, over the value and work that I produce for other people. So if that is available to you, and if that's something you want to focus on, then I think sitting down to figure out when you don't want to be working is a great way to start setting boundaries around your time. We are human beings, we are mammals. We do need to rest in order to live. Like, we do require some amount of sleep on a regular basis. And rest is not just important so that you can wake up and be productive and go to work the next day and produce and create income and revenue. Rest is important because you're a human being, because you're an animal. Rest has to be part of the equation. So thinking about rest first, thinking about time off first, or time that you're not working first, acknowledges the fact that you're human and you're an animal and you do have physiological needs, physical needs, and you have a body that you need to take care of. And if you didn't have the body, you wouldn't be here working anyways. So that needs to be prioritized first. And I want to invite you and empower you to do that if you're not already. Schedule that in first. That is what I've been doing the last couple of years, is scheduling my time off first, setting my work hours after that, and then setting the time that I will be working on different types of projects, because that is helpful to me. Setting your time off, or when you're not going to be working, scheduling in your vacations, scheduling some personal days. I schedule one personal day for myself each month where I won't be working, and it's not even just so that I can get in hair appointments or doctor's appointments and stuff. It is so that I can just have a fucking day off, period. I deserve that, and I want that in my life. So I schedule those first before I work around or work into my calendar my actual business working hours. That is client work, that is client-facing meetings, that is meetings with colleagues or in groups that I'm a part of, that is administrative work, working on my business. All of that gets scheduled in on different days, because I like to have days where I don't see fucking clients at all. I don't have any meetings. And then I have days where I'm like, all right, I know that on Wednesdays and Thursdays, that's going to be the bulk or the majority of my client-facing meetings. So I know Wednesdays and Thursdays, I need to have a certain level of energy, personal, talking to other human beings time. But then there are days where I have it blocked off so that I don't have any client meetings. And that way I know that I can kind of be a little bit of a goblin. I can still get work done on those days, but I don't need to talk to people. So it requires a different level of energy from me. I decide on setting that up next. And you might find that that works for you, depending on what type of work you're doing. But if you're a bookkeeper, and you're only doing solo work, you never really have client-facing meetings, it might work for you to have days where you do payroll versus the bookkeeping versus financial accounting tasks or something like that. You could schedule out your days so that on one day you're doing business admin, and another day you're actually meeting with clients and having those client-facing calls and meetings. So that might work for you. It might be that 1 week out of the month is the only week that you see clients, and you really have to like get yourself into client-facing mode to have those meetings that week. You get to decide. That is the beauty of entrepreneurship and owning a business, is getting to make these choices, getting to set things up the way that is most supportive and helpful for you. Because if the point of this is to be making money, and that does require you to work, it might as well be done in a way that is very supportive to you as the animal and the human being that you are. Another area of work and life that is a great place to set a boundary is communications. And this is specifically with a business, how you communicate with your clients, when and about what. And then how they can communicate with you. Let's start with how people can communicate with you. Do you have a business phone number? Are they allowed to call that number? Are they allowed to text that number? How do they interact with your business? How do they communicate with your business? Is it only through email because you like to have a written record of things? Is it through Facebook Messenger or TikTok DMs or YouTube comments? Like, how do you want people to be communicating with you? And how do you not want them to communicate with you? I prefer that people don't call me, like, at all. I don't like talking on the phone. I want to have a record of like what we were discussing. So if I'm on a client call, like a Zoom call, I sit there and take notes in a Word document. I make note of the date. I make note of what we talked about. I make note of action items, all that good stuff. There are apps that can help you that integrate with Zoom, or even, a phone system that will help you kind of take those same notes and give you the information of what was talked about. For most people, like, you probably already have a preferred method of communication. I don't even mind text, and I do allow my clients to text me, but I don't prefer it. I prefer email over text. But I give them that option because I think it's helpful for a lot of people to be able to text. If they are out and about and they think of something, it's easy for them to send a quick text message versus like waiting to draft an email or even calling me. So I allow people to do that, but it's not my preferred method of communication. How I communicate with my clients is a different story. I send everything via email. Like, you're gonna get an email from me no matter what. If there's something that I need to communicate with my clients, you get an email from me. I might text you if I know that I will get a response faster if I text. I rarely call anybody. Just don't like being on the phone. That's me. I'm a millennial, right? It's also about setting boundaries, not just with the method of communication, but the timing of communication, right? If you do allow people to text you, is it to a phone number that you've got notifications turned on and they're texting you all weekend? Do you not want them to do that? Because you could tell them, don't text me over the weekend. Or you could just fucking turn off notifications. Or you could just not have that app on your phone if it's like a business number through an app like Ring Central. You could just not fucking have that app on your phone. Turn off notifications completely so that you're not checking that over the weekend. The timing of when people can communicate with me, I think, is outside of my control. Because again, I'm not controlling what other people do. If people are calling you, all weekend, and you don't work on weekends, you don't respond to communications over the weekend, that might be an instance where you set that boundary and you say, please don't call me over the weekend. If you need to get in touch with me, send me an email. I don't respond to calls over the weekend. And then you can mute your calls or turn off those notifications or something. But communication is a big deal when it comes to boundaries, because you have to communicate upfront what your boundaries about communication are. In my engagement letter, for example, for my bookkeeping clients, I tell them, here's how you send me information. You're going to upload it to my file sharing portal. I will respond to email communications these hours, these days during the week. It is not all day. It is not every day. It is not every business day. I clearly communicate those communication boundaries with my clients up front because I want to be helpful. I want them to understand like how I work, the best way that I work. And then from there, they can do what they will with that information. A lot of people don't read it, and that's fine. Another area that you should be setting boundaries in, yes, I'm shooting you, is your work. your products, your offers, your services. You need to set boundaries for that as well, my friend. Everything that is included in your offer needs to be clearly stated and communicated with the client. Everything in a product should be clearly communicated with the client what exactly it is that they are getting whenever they purchase from you. What is not included is less important than what is included, because you could say, like, there are no elephants included in this product. That might be obvious, but you might want to say that, because if it's relevant to what you offer, it would be a good idea to say, you're getting this, and it does not include these things that you might expect or that other people might include whenever you purchase a similar product from them. The boundaries around what you sell are important to clearly state up front, and to state what might not be included if that information is relevant. This is not something that you have to tell anybody ever, but it could be good for you to write it down or to establish that for yourself, so that if someone asks, and when they ask, because they're going to, you can tell them, like, that's not in my wheelhouse. That is not in the scope of this project. That is not something that I do for clients, but I can refer you to someone who does. Knowing that for yourself ahead of time means that when the question gets asked, you don't have to sit there and consider it. You could just say no, because you've already decided you're not doing that. And that is what a boundary is, right? We decided ahead of time. We are responsible for upholding that. It is not somebody else's responsibility to decide what kind of work we want to do when we're entrepreneurs, or what kind of offers we sell when we own our own business. It's not up to the client to figure out what they want. It is up to you to figure out what you are willing to do. That is what a boundary is. Let's talk about what happens when someone is at your boundary. So I kind of gave the visual or the idea of like a door or a wall earlier. And let's go with the visual of a door, because doors can be opened, and boundaries are not like a permanent thing that you can't ever change. But a door is something that, like, when you turn the handle and open it, you've made that choice. You have done that action. You turn the handle and you open the door. So what happens when someone's at your boundary in your business? Let's talk about what happens. It's up to you whether or not you want to uphold the boundary, but I don't think you should make the decision about whether to let go of the boundary the moment that someone's asking you. If it's something you've decided ahead of time, there's a fucking reason for that. You've probably already considered the pros and cons, what kind of life you want to have, what kind of work you want to be doing when you want to work, etc. All the things we just talked about. You've already made that choice. So if someone were to ask you to do something, or request something, or if they were doing something in the moment and you have a boundary about that, that's not the time to consider, well, I mean, maybe just this one time, blah, blah, blah. That's not the time to consider it, okay? Because you're already in that state of having been asked for something. And most of us want to be helpful. Most of us want to serve other people. Most of us want to make some fucking money. And that can lead to not turning clients away, even if you don't want to work with those people or do that kind of work for somebody else. So it's good to remember that when someone's at your boundary and they're making a request of you, they're asking you something, they're telling you something, because boundaries could be about what you don't want to have a conversation about, right? You can say, that's a topic that I don't like to talk about. Let's change the subject. When someone's at your boundary, you still have the agency and the autonomy to uphold that boundary, or to let it go, to let go of the boundary and open that door and allow someone to step beyond that boundary. You have that agency throughout the entire process. So if someone were at your front door and they were ringing the doorbell, you don't have to answer it, right? I will straight up hide from people because I have a front door that has like window panes in it. And so if someone were at the front door, they could see into my house. And I'd run into the other room. I don't want to be seen. I don't want people to know that I'm home. I'm not answering the door. Like, that is an option, right? But if you do answer the door, if you do, indulge somebody who's at that boundary, be prepared to have a conversation about that too. Or don't. Up to you. You have the agency and the autonomy. But if you make the choice to open the door and let somebody in, and if you make the choice to no longer uphold that boundary, you don't have anybody to blame but yourself. Like, that was your responsibility to uphold it, and you chose not to. And nobody else can be responsible for the fact that you let that boundary go, right? So when it comes to business, like, we can't blame our clients or be resentful of our clients whenever we're not willing to stick to our boundaries and to hold those boundaries up, right? It's not the job of the client to decide when you work and how you communicate. So if they are doing something that crosses a boundary, you're the one that is responsible for keeping that boundary, right? Because we're not in control of what other people do, and other people are not in control of what we do. To piggyback off of that, how someone reacts to your boundary is none of your fucking business. If you don't answer the phone, you don't like to be texted, and you tell a client, please email me this, I won't respond to text messages from you, and they continue to do that, or they throw a hissy fit about it, or they fire you or whatever, that's none of your business how they reacted and responded to you setting that boundary, because you're not in control of how they react. And it probably has nothing to do with you anyways. Like, if somebody were asking you to do a project for them and you said, no, I don't do that, and then they were upset about you saying no, like, that's their business. And it probably doesn't have to do with the fact that you said no. It's probably that they're like, I gotta get this project done. I'm stressed about this project. I'm not capable of doing it myself, or I need help, or, I need to get this project done myself now, or I've got to find somebody else to do it. Like, those are all things that have to do with them and their fucking project. And it doesn't have anything to do with the fact that you said no. That's where I'm talking about, like, we need to be detached from what happens with other people whenever they come up to our boundary. And that is, something to always be striving for. And you're never going to do it perfectly. And you shouldn't want to do it perfectly anyways. I certainly don't. I still get irritated and annoyed with people for just asking questions about things that I don't want to do sometimes. And that's on me, right? Like, that's my thing to deal with. It's not the fault of the other person. It is not my business how they feel about stuff. What is my business is how I feel about it. If somebody's at your boundary and they're asking you to do something, or they're making a request, or they are, communicating with you in a way that you've asked them not to, or said that you don't like, that is not the time to reconsider that boundary. When do we set boundaries then? Or how? It is something you decide for yourself alone. And it might be you setting a boundary because someone asked you to do something and you were like, oh, is that something I want to do? And then you go by yourself and figure it out about how you want to set that boundary. So setting a boundary could be something you do in response to being asked to do something. But I think it's probably more effective to set boundaries about what kind of work you're doing when you're doing it, like we talked about, like setting up your calendar, getting really clear on what's included in your offers and what you sell, and doing that ahead of time so that if somebody asks something of you, you already know what the answer is going to be and you can communicate that with them. The first step to doing this is to think about an area of your life that maybe you're like, ooh, I could use a little better balance in that area, or I want to feel better about this area of my life. Start there. Start at a place that you already know you could improve upon in some way. And then consider, what are my options for this area of my life? How could I interact with somebody else? What kind of work could I be doing? What do I like? What do I not like that I already know, like, I don't like this? I don't like getting called on the weekend or when I'm on vacation. What are some of the ways or the things that you know that you like already? What are some of the possibilities for how you could approach that subject or that area of your business? If it has to do with communications in your business, think about what works in your personal life and the ways that you like to communicate with other people, like friends and family. Start with that area, think about what the options are, and then we gotta remember that we are humans. At that point, we have to get real honest with ourselves about living in a human physical body in a skin suit, being a mammal, being an animal, and about what our physical needs are and what we want. Do you have needs or maybe some sort of disability that requires you to get more sleep or to take more frequent breaks during the day instead of working for hours in a stretch of time. Consider what your body needs first and what you want your life to look like. Thinking about yourself as a human first and taking care of your human body first, what do you need in that area of your life? How do you want that area of your life to look, considering the fact that you live in a skin suit, right? What you're gonna do is set that boundary at the point where those human wants and needs are being met first and no closer. So if you set the boundary considering like the amount of rest you need, the amount of time that you want to be able to take off, when you don't want to be working, with whom you don't want to work. And if you set the boundary there and then you move it closer and you leave off one of those wants or needs that you have, that's not gonna serve you. That is gonna be something that you end up resenting. Don't move it any closer, but you can establish the boundary where all of your wants or needs are being met, and then you can go further than that, right? Like you can take up more space and you can have more things than just what you need, because this is your choice about how you want to work and what you want to be doing and when. And then decide how you want to communicate that boundary in an assertive way, in a way that supports you and is clearly communicated with somebody else and is assertive without being wishy-washy, but without being aggressive either. I'm using the word assertive and not aggressive because you are allowed to assert to somebody else what you want and need, where your boundary is, what you're not willing to do, and how you are not willing to be treated. The statement for setting a boundary starts with I, and it is I will be, or I won't be, or I'm willing to do this, or I'm not willing to do this. That is the boundary statement that you need to set. It begins with you, and it begins where you're willing to do something or you're not willing to do something. How far are you willing to go to meet somebody and ask them to meet you there, or ask them to step back a little bit? Like, that is what a boundary is. And a boundary is something that can be stated up front in a client relationship. Like, you could say to somebody up front in an engagement letter or in the details of what they're buying, what you're willing to do and not willing to do. You can state that up front, and I think for me, that works well to communicate that up front with my clients first, so that everybody's expectations are kind of on the same page for the most part. I find that to be very helpful, but it's not something that you're required to do, right? So you can set it up front, or you can decide, I know what my boundary is, but I don't need to state it or assert it until someone comes up to it, or until someone starts to cross that boundary. And then I'm gonna say, hey, like, this is not how I do things, or this is how I prefer to do things. So you can decide, am I gonna say it up front, or am I going to assert it when someone comes up to it? And let them know, actually, I'm not willing to do that. Boundaries can always be adjusted, they can always be moved, they can be removed completely, but if you're willing to remove them, consider why you wanted to set the boundary in the first place or at all. But they can be changed and modified, and you don't need an excuse or a reason to do that. And nobody can ask you to change a boundary. If someone is, that is a boundary where I would say, no, I'm not doing that, right? So it's not something that anybody has control over but you, and it is your responsibility to take care to hold that boundary up and to clearly and assertively communicate that with somebody else. Some of the effects of setting boundaries are that you will feel more safe and more protected in your body. Like in your physical body, you will feel less stressed, anxious, unsafe, unprotected, less vulnerable. When you know, all right, if somebody says this thing to me, or if somebody makes this request of me, this is my boundary and this is how I'm going to assert it, that helps me feel like, okay, like I can trust myself to hold that boundary up even when it gets a little bit tough. Or if I want to help somebody, I still know that I've decided ahead of time that I'm not going to be doing what they're asking of me. And that helps me feel less anxious, and I dread those kinds of conversations less because I've decided ahead of time how I'm going to handle it, right? So that feels really good to me. I feel really self-assured. And if you are somebody that feels really anxious or troubled or dreads, certain types of client interactions, think about how in the past maybe you weren't holding up a boundary or you weren't asserting yourself in the best way to protect yourself. And that may have eroded some of the self-trust of, I know what I'm going to say in a situation where someone is making a request of me, or if there are any types of conflict that arise, like I trust myself to stay calm and assertive and to handle it and still be kind and compassionate and have a good, healthy, functional relationship with somebody else. Feeling safer, getting clear about what kind of work you're willing to do, what you're not willing to do, it just feels a lot better. And I think it will go far in improving the relationships that you have, not only with yourself and your business and your work, but with clients and colleagues and potential clients and people on the internet who say shit in the comments of your videos or whatever it is, right? You're going to have a better relationship to those other people that you have to interact with, because that's what business is. It is providing services or products to other people, and you do need to be interacting with other people. Setting a boundary, setting really good boundaries, protecting yourself, feeling safe, feeling better, and more trusting about how you handle things can go a long way towards creating the business and the life that you want to lead. And I think that this has been one of the most important things that I've always known about running a business, especially because as a bookkeeper, even when I was working for a business, employed doing bookkeeping at an accounting firm, I still understood what our clients needed to do as far as setting boundaries, as far as deciding how they're going to work and when. And when I started my own business, it was really, really important for me to decide these things up front. Here's what I'm going to be doing. Here's the type of bookkeeping packages that I'm going to sell. Here's the types of trainings and one-on-one offers that I'm going to provide. I like to be somebody that gets clear about that up front, because when I'm clear about it, then I can sell it better to my client. When I'm very clear about what my business does and my relationship with my business, and I feel safe and protected in that way, that means that I can show up and serve my clients in the way that is most helpful and least harmful to them too. And that's very important to me. That is something that I've always known, but being in therapy and working on boundaries for my personal relationships the past 6 months or so has really helped me define even better boundaries for my business and for my work and for my time. Taking time off is still a little bit of a challenge for me, and I suspect that there will always be something that comes up whenever I am going on vacation and not working. That's probably always going to be the case, and that's okay, because I don't have to be mean to myself about that. I don't have to beat myself up for the fact that taking time off is a little bit of an anxiety inducing thing for me. That's actually totally fucking normal, right? If you are somebody that kind of struggles with setting boundaries, especially in your business, or if you're a brand new business owner who wants to get clear about money and finances and bookkeeping, come join us inside the Mind the Gap community. This is the community that I facilitate for entrepreneurs. It is a virtual space that is nurturing and has built-in accountability that is non-punitive, meaning there's no punishment for you not doing something or for doing something incorrectly. That is built into that space that I've been curating. I really put a lot of intention into how I want people to be engaged with the community. And if you are somebody that struggles with setting boundaries, I really want to encourage you to come join the Mind the Gap community and work on that with us. It's not just about bookkeeping and money, although money is a great place to set boundaries too for how you make and spend money. But I want you to use the community as a place to feel that you can work through some of this stuff, that you can make mistakes, get feedback, and do it in a space that I'm helping to facilitate, but that I'm not the leader of, right? I want everybody that's in the community to create that space together and to be able to lean on each other when things get tough and when you are not sure about something or you're a little bit activated or irritated or frustrated. I want that to be a space where people can come and like work through those things together, because community is what we are going to need, what we've always needed. And I wanted to have a space for my people to come and do that work together. So join us inside the Mind the Gap community. There are some amazing things happening in 2025 inside the community. I'm so excited about it, but I gotta get through January 31st. I have to get through January's books, closing out 2024, doing the 1099s, doing the W-2s, all that good stuff. Gotta get through that first before we can do some amazing things together this year. So thank you so much for watching. If you have stuck around this long, make sure you hit subscribe, hit the like button, leave me a comment letting me know what you thought about boundaries versus balance, which B word you prefer, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye. Well, it happened, and my battery did run out on me because this video is turning out to be really long. That's okay though. I have a lot to say about this, obviously. Yeah.